Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into our daily quiz. Since it is Sunday, we would have the static part of our discussion. The subject that we have chosen today is governance. Let's look into the first question. The Central Vigilance Commissioner is appointed by the President on the recommendation of a three-member committee. This consists of Prime Minister, Union Minister of Home Affairs, Leader of the Opposition in the Lok Sabha, Chief Justice of India, Cabinet Secretary. The answer to this is 1, 2, and 3. Let's try and understand what is the Central Vigilance Commission all about. When it comes to the Central Vigilance Commission, what is the basic functionality of this commission? This is constituted to curb the corruption in the offices of the Indian government. This particular commission will have a three-member body. One, it includes Central Vigilance Commissioner, and they will also have two vigilance commissioner, so the maximum number would be 3 in number. One, it includes Central Vigilance Commissioner, and two would be the vigilance commissioners. This particular commission would be appointed on the recommendation of a Prime Minister, Minister of Home Affairs, and the Leader of Opposition in the Lok Sabha. The term of office is 4 years or up till the age of 65 years of age, whichever is earlier, and after their retirement they are not eligible for the reappointment in the central or the state government agency. Now let's look into the next practice question. Which of the following statements about self-help groups is or correct? It is an informal group and registration under Societies Act is mandatory. Self-help groups offer collateral-free loans to its members based on mutual trust. Which of the statements are correct? Since it is asking for the correct statement, the answer to this is 2 only. Why? Let's try and understand. What is this concept of self-help group? Basically, as the very name denotes, it is speaking about self-help, which basically means people come together on their own efforts, on the resources that they bring together. They bring up a particular strategy where they do not rely on the government, they do not rely on official organizations from a different setup, but they ensure that money that they have saved and all this money is grouped up, and this particular money will be used for their own growth and development. Since number of people involuntarily join together, they collect this particular money. This particular money would be given to the members of that particular group as a collateral free loan. Also remember, when it comes to this self-help group, they need not be registered under the Societies Act, since it is a voluntary movement, since people come together on their own, since people help their fellow people in that particular group. They need not have to register with the Societies Act, State Cooperative Act, or any of the partnership firms as well. Now let's look into the next practice question. E-Government Developmental Index is released by, is it World Bank, World Economic Forum, United Nations Public Administration Program, Heritage Foundation, a Washington-based think tank? The answer to this is C, which is United Nations Public Administration Program. What is this E-Government Developmental Index? Basically, this is one of the surveys that is conducted annually, whose reports are published every 2 years by the United Nations Public Administration Program. What does it do? This particular index basically analyzes the capacity and willingness of a particular country to utilize all the e-governance initiatives and tools for the development in that particular country. So whether that particular country is using this particular e-governance index and how effectively it is using for the growth of the people in that particular country is what is this e-government developmental index. Now let's look into the next practice question. Consider the following statements. Lokpal and Lokayuktas Act incorporates provisions for attachment and confiscation of property of public servants acquired by corrupt means even while the prosecution is pending. Second option, the Lokpal has jurisdiction to inquire into allegations of corruption against any society or trust or body that receives foreign contribution. Which of the above statements is or correct? The answer to this is one only. Why? That is because when you look into the second option, a plain reading of this particular statement will for sure feel that this particular option is right. But there is a small glitch here. What is it? According to the Lokpal, the jurisdiction is in reference to all those societies or trusts where the foreign contribution is more than 10 lakh. If the foreign contribution is more than 10 lakh, that is when Lokpal would be able to investigate about the allegation of corruption, and it is not for all types of societies or trust. So the catch here is that there is a particular trust or a particular group or an organization, if it is receiving more than 10 lakh in number, that is when this particular organization would be able to investigate. Apart from this, we all know for the fact that Lokpal has its jurisdiction when it comes to the Prime Minister, the Minister in the Union Government, the Member of the Parliament, as well as officials when it comes to the Union Government. So all those people, the chairpersons, the members, the officers, the directors of any board, corporation, society, trust, or autonomous body will fall under the investigation proceedings of the Lokpal. So kindly remember, this particular Lokpal will include all of these people, but when it comes to society or trust, only if it gets more than 10 lakh, that is when it will start its investigation. Now let's look into the next practice question. With reference to Right to Information Act 2005, which of the following statements is correct? Information can be disclosed by public authorities on a suo motu or proactive basis. An applicant seeking information under RTI is not required to pay any fee. Non-resident Indians can file RTI applications to seek governance related information. Which of the statements are correct? The answer to this is 1 and 3 only. Why? That is because when you look into this particular information or an option in 1, we have one of the sections called as section 4 of 2. According to this particular section of the Right to Information Act, it clearly mandates that the government or the public officials will have to release the information on a suo motu basis. Why? Let's say for example, let's say if each of us want to file an application to get certain information from the government, it will be huge pile of cases or information that the government will have to provide. So whatever the government feels is necessity on its own, it would be able to release such an information by any modes of communication. It can be the press media, it can be the print media, it can be the internet media. So whatever the government feels, whatever the public officials feels, on a periodic basis, on a suo motu basis, on a proactive basis, they would be able to release such information. Now, when we look into the third option, the non-resident Indians can file the RTI applications when it comes to the government related information. Yes, this option is also right, but when it comes to the second option, this is partially right and partially wrong. Why? Only if there is a person who is able to say that he belongs to a particular category, that is below poverty line, and if he is able to show this particular document, only then he need not have to pay this particular fee. But for the rest of them, they have to pay charges by the cash or by the DD, that is through the paying of about 10 rupees for the information. As a result, what we have is the second option, which is wrong, and the answer would be 1 and 3 only. Now let's look into the next practice question. Which of the following statements is incorrect with reference to the Citizens Charter? It includes organization's vision and mission statement. It includes what the citizens can expect out of the service provider. The Citizens Charter is legally enforceable. It includes expectations of the organization from the citizen for fulfilling the commitment of the organization. Which of the statements in this particular one is incorrect? Since it is asking for the incorrect statement, the answer to this is C. So the answer would be the Citizens Charter is legally enforceable. This happens to be an incorrect statement. What is it about Citizens Charter? A Citizen Charter is a voluntary and the written document that spells out the service provider's effort to focus on their commitment towards fulfilling the needs of the citizens or the customer. This includes how citizens can readdress their grievance. This includes what can be expected from the service provider. So basically, the Citizen Charter preserves the trust between the service provider and the citizens. To put it out in simple terms, what we have is an organization. This organization has its goals and achievements. This particular government office or a particular program or a particular organization will have to achieve certain agendas, objectives. How will it meet this particular objective is what is prescribed under the Citizens Charter. So the Citizens Charter will empower the citizens to improve the quality of public services, ensure transparency and right to information, save the time of both the customer and the service provider, have clear targets for all levels of services. Now let's look into the next practice question. Consider the following statements about social audits. It is a process in which details of resource, both financial and non-financial, used by public agencies for developmental initiatives are shared with the people. The Center for Social Audit provides a clear set of guidelines to carry out and sustain the process of social audit. Which of the above statements is or correct? The answer to this is both. So when it comes to social audit, what is the agenda of this particular program or the social audit? It basically examines and assesses whether that particular program, whether that particular scheme which has been conducted by the government and the public officials, is it meeting the ground realities when it comes to the adaptation. What exactly happens? Let's say, for example, the government would have what is called as output and the outcome. What is this output? Let's say, for example, when it comes to the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, the government will give a target to a public official that it is these many toilets that you have to build. So the target that is prescribed by the government to the public official is what is called as the output. Then there is something called as the outcome. What is the outcome? Let's say the original intent of the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan is to provide sanitation, is to have clean services, hygiene in nature when it comes to the rural and the urban areas. So what is it wanting? It is wanting to improvise on the sanitation. So the outcome is, it is not only about the numbers that are present when it comes to the actual toilets that are built, but whether this particular objective is met or not. So the output will be the construction of the toilets, but the outcome is whether the people are using it, is water services being provided to this particular toilet, whether there is the pits that is removed periodically. This will be the outcome of that particular project. So what does this social audit do? This social audit will basically mean that people engage, audit a particular program, understand if there is a social transformation, community participation, and keep a check of the government accountability. So whatever the government has said, has the original objective been met, that will be categorized under the social audit scheme. When it comes to the social audit, it will try and identify, educate the people about their rights and entitlements. It is a collective platform for the people to ask their questions. It strengthens the decentralized governance. It brings about transparency and accountability in the government schemes. How? Because they are asking questions to the government. Now let's look into the next practice question. Which of the following provides government to business e-government services? Shram Suvidha Portal, Deep Portal, Parivesh Portal, Udyog Aadhaar. The answer to this is 1, 2, 3, and 4. What is this government to business e-governance services? There are different types of modules. Let's say, for example, government to business, government to customer. What are these services? Let's say, for example, there is one of the programs of the government. This particular program will help in increasing the governance initiative. It will increase the accountability and transparency. So when the government tool is provided for the own use of the government, that is what is called as government to government e-governance service. Let's say, for example, the Khajane in the state of Karnataka is one of the treasury tools that is used in the state government of Karnataka. That is government to government. Then we have what is called as the government to customer. Let's say, for example, the government has come up with a particular e-governance tool. This e-governance tool is supported by the government to the customers so that people start using this particular service, which will enhance e-governance. That is what is called as the government to the customer service. Finally, what we have is the government to business e-government service. Let's say, for example, before 1990, before we opened up what is called as the liberalization, privatization, and globalization, India was known for its permit Raj. India was known for its license Raj. But after 1990, we started opening up the economy, and now what we have is number of government initiatives taken by the government for the businesses. So the permit Raj, the license Raj, that which India was famous before 1990 is completely done away with. So all the tools that the government has designed for the businesses so that the ease of doing business increases over a period of time, where we use the e-governance initiatives, that is what is called as government to business e-governance services. So in India right now, the Samsuvidha portal is the G2B governance scheme. Deep portal is about G2B e-governance service. Parivesh portal is the same, and the Udyog Aadhaar is also helping in advancing and enhancing accountability and transparency when it comes to the government as well as the business services. Now let's look into the next practice question. The principle of audi alterum partem is closely related to idea of no one should be made a judge in his own cause, no one should be condemned unheard, the person making the decision must act impartially when considering the matter, decisions must be rendered within a reasonable amount of time. When you look into this particular statement, most of them look alike, but the most appropriate one for the principle of audi alterum partem is that no one should be condemned unheard. This happens to be the principle of natural justice. So what is this principle all about? Let's say there is one of the cases. This particular case has two parties. So there is a particular presiding officer. Let's assume for a moment it is an administrative tribunal, or let's say for example it is a judiciary. So when the judiciary is looking into this particular case, there are two parties involved here. So there is one party, let's say A party, and there is another party, that is B party. So when the judge is giving a particular judgment, or the judge is listening to a particular case, it has to listen to party A, it also has to listen to party B. So no one should be condemned unheard is what is called as audi alterum partem. So audi alterum partem basically is one of the important principles when it comes to the administrative governance, which speaks about that every single person, alternative parties, opposite parties will have to be heard before justice is delivered by the administrative tribunal or by the judiciary. Now let's look into the next practice question. With reference to Joint State Public Service Commission, which of the following statements is or correct? A JSPSC is created by a Parliament Act on concerned state legislatures request. The President appoints the chairman as well as the members of JSPSC. The office is held by them for a 6-year term or until the age of 65 years is attained by them, whichever is earlier. Which of the statements are correct? The answer to this is 1 and 2 only. Why? That is because when you look into the term that they would be in service, it is not 65, but instead it is 62 years. So because it is 62 years, the third option is wrong. So the Constitution makes a provision for the establishment of the Joint State Public Service Commission for 2 or more states, but it is created by the Parliament on the concerned state legislature's request. The President can remove or suspend them. They can submit their resignation letters to the President anytime, and the President determines the number of members of the JSPSC and their conditions of service. This particular commission will present an annual report to the concerned state governors, and this particular report will be placed in front of the state legislature. The Union Public Service Commission or the UPSC can also serve the needs of a particular state on the state governor's request and with the President's approval. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this practice question. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.